Bonjour, bienvenue à tous à cette conférence de presse. Je suis Boris Proulx, journaliste au journal Le Devoir et je serai le modérateur de ce point de presse. Just a quick reminders for you reporters in the room to be very mindful not to put your little earpiece next to the microphone. This can create hurtful audio feedback for our beloved interpreters. We definitely don't want that. Sur ce, nous accueillons aujourd'hui la ministre des Finances du Canada et vice-première ministre Chrystia Freeland, le ministre des Services publics et de l'approvisionnement et lieutenant du Québec Jean-Yves Duclos, and virtually is joined the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, Sean Fraser. The ministers will deliver short remarks, and after which we will take questions first in the room and then online. Si vous êtes sur Zoom, vous pouvez utiliser la fonction « Lever la main » maintenant et je vous reconnaîtrai en temps et lieu. On that, ministers, you have the floor.
OK, merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Je parlerai de l'économie canadienne et ferai le point sur les nouvelles règles hypothécaires annoncées la semaine dernière. Après ça, le ministre Fraser parlera du travail qui est fait à propos du Fonds d'infrastructure pour le logement. Et après ça, le ministre Jean-Yves Duclos parlera du nouveau projet de charte des droits des locataires et de charte du droit des acheteurs et de manière dont ils sont liés à notre fonds d'infrastructure pour le logement. I just want to start by highlighting some of the positive news we've been receiving about the Canadian economy. Canada is leading the G7 in achieving a soft landing. We had some good news last week that inflation was 2% in August. That means inflation has been in the Bank of Canada's target range for 8 months in a row, and that is a 42-month low. Canada has now been the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the first time, the first G7 country to cut interest rates for a second time, and the first G7 country to cut interest rates for a third time. And we have now seen wages outpacing inflation for 19 months in a row. The IMF is forecasting that Canada will have the second strongest growth in the G7 this year and the strongest growth in the G7 next year. It has been a really hard time for Canadians since COVID and the COVID recession, and these are some promising signs. What I want to talk about specifically today is the new mortgage rules that we announced yesterday and some technical guidance that we are releasing today. That technical guidance will be helpful to Canadians seeking to take advantage of these new rules, and that technical guidance has been essential for Canadian financial institutions to make it possible for them to make these new mortgages available. I have been having meetings yesterday and last week with the leaders of Canadian financial institutions, with the Canadian Banking Association, to ensure that Canadian financial institutions are ready to make these new mortgages available on December 15th, to ensure they have all the information, the technical details they need from the government. And they have assured me that they do and that they will be ready. So the specific technical information that we're releasing today is on the price cap for insured mortgages. We announced last week that would go from $1 million to $1.5 million. We're announcing today what the down payment rules will be. So currently, for your first $500,000 of the purchase price, the down payment needs to be 5%. Currently, for the next $500,000, the down payment needs to be 10%. And what we're doing is simply extending that so that for the first $500,000 in insured mortgages, your down payment will need to be 5%. For the remaining up to $1 million, the down payment will need to be 10%. Very simple, very straightforward. 10%, I see people frowning. 10% of that additional up to $1 million and then 5% of the first 500,000. It is very much in line with how the system works today, simply adding an additional 500,000 on top at the same 10% level. Simple, straightforward, simple for financial institutions, simple for Canadians. I do just want to remind people that we have also extended amortizations to 30 years for all first-time home buyers and for all buyers of new builds. That as well is effective December 15th. Taken together, these measures, we believe, will help first-time home buyers. They are part of our plan for fairness for every generation to help young Canadians achieve that dream of home ownership. And with the focus on new builds, they are also going to help on the supply side by creating more demand focused on those new builds, which we urgently need. Il s'agit des réformes hypothécaires les plus importantes depuis des décennies. Tout cela fait part de notre plan visant à construire 4 millions de nouveaux logements et à rendre le logement plus abordable, surtout pour les jeunes. Notre gouvernement comprend l'importance de donner une chance équitable à tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes à chaque génération. Merci beaucoup. Et je passe maintenant la parole à Sean Fraser. Sean, over to you.
Excellent, merci Chrystia. Bonjour tout le monde, c'est un plaisir d'être ici dans l'environnement virtuel. I want to just start by following up on the mortgage changes that Chrystia has just shared details on. It's really important that we recognize the challenges that a lot of people, particularly young people, are experiencing when it comes to getting into the market and unlocking the potential to own their own home. We've tried to base our measures around the home buying experience that people have walked us through. And what we hear loud and clear is there's a couple of stumbling blocks that make it really difficult for people to get into the market. Down payments and monthly payments are a very big part of it. When it comes to down payments, previously we've introduced the First Home Savings Account. Many hundreds of thousands of young Canadians have signed up towards that down payment, and we've made more flexible rules around the RRSP Home Buyers Plan. The changes to the insured mortgage limit that Minister Freeland has just outlined is going to potentially reduce the down payment required by tens of thousands of dollars for people trying to get into the market, particularly in larger urban environments where the purchase price is much higher than you find in a lot of smaller towns and rural communities. But in addition, we want to make sure that people can afford their monthly payments. The extension of 30-year amortization periods for people trying to get into the market is going to spread out their payments over a longer period of time, which of course is going to have the impact of having smaller monthly payments. These layered on top of the measure to include rental history towards your credit allows us to unblock the potential for home ownership for a lot of people who tell us that credit, down payments, and monthly payments are all stumbling blocks that they run into. But it's one thing to create opportunities for people to save up to get into the market and to manage their monthly budget. It's another thing to make sure that we're actually seeing the homes built for people to buy. And it's essential that we recognize if we're going to meet our home building goals, we need to have the infrastructure in place that supports the potential for more housing. That's why we've created the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund. But we've determined that we don't simply want to cut a blank check to municipalities or to provinces and territories with nothing in return. We want to make sure that the measures being put in place make it easier to build homes in the jurisdictions where we invest, including measures to encourage more gentle density, including a reduction of taxes on home building through the form of development cost charges. We have decided to move forward by placing certain expectations on our partners in exchange for very real supports in the form of federal funding. There are two updates that I wanted to provide in terms of the progress of the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund. The first is that negotiations with our provincial counterparts have begun. We have now reached out to administer $5 billion of the $6 billion program through bilateral agreements we hope to reach with provinces and territories, because we do believe by working with partners who advance measures that make it easier to build homes, we're going to be able to get more done by making sure we're layering federal funding on top of what supports provinces may put in place. But we've also heard directly from municipalities who are ready to build with projects that could move very quickly if the infrastructure was in the ground. So while we sort out the negotiations with our provincial and territorial partners, we are launching a direct delivery stream where municipalities can apply directly to the federal government. $1 billion of the $6 billion program will be administered through this direct delivery stream, and we expect the application portal to open during the month of October. We're looking forward to moving as quickly as possible to partner with those communities who adopt measures to make it easier to build homes in the form of more density, like 4-unit as of right zoning, who agree not to increase development cost charges. So those who build homes have predictability for the long term, that they're not simply going to see the cost of building go up as more money is contributed towards the infrastructure that we put in place. It's essential if the federal government's going to build the infrastructure to enable more homes, that we're going to ensure that those homes and communities are being designed in a way that makes the most of the infrastructure that we have now and reduces the cost of building and operating the infrastructure that we build for the long term. Thanks very much. Merci tout le monde. C'est mon plaisir de passer la parole à ma collègue, Ms. Ministre Duclos.
Merci, Sean, et merci, Chrystia, et bonjour tout le monde. On le sait, un chez-soi sûr et abordable est bien plus qu'un simple endroit où vivre. C'est une condition de base pour que les gens qui nous écoutent puissent s'épanouir et contribuer pleinement à notre société. Mais c'est aussi un droit de la personne fondamentale, comme l'a reconnu le gouvernement canadien pour la première fois de l'histoire dans la loi en juin 2019. Reconnaître un tel droit vient toutefois avec des obligations et des actions. Et c'est pour ça que pour appuyer concrètement la défense de ce droit, mon collègue, le ministre Fraser, a annoncé en mai le plan le plus ambitieux en logement depuis 40 ans. Une partie de ce plan inclut la construction de plus de logements sur les terrains fédéraux et plus rapidement. En août, nous avons d'ailleurs publié une première série de propriétés fédérales disponibles déjà pour construire près de 25 000 nouveaux logements sur les propriétés fédérales à travers le pays, et davantage de terrains fédéraux pour le logement seront annoncés et rendus disponibles dans les prochaines semaines. Par ailleurs, les mesures annoncées dans le cadre du budget 2024, comme la déclaration des droits des locataires et la déclaration des droits des acheteurs de maisons, vont rendre les règles du marché plus équitables pour protéger les droits des locataires et leur permettre de devenir plus facilement propriétaires. Au Québec, comme partout ailleurs au pays, il est en particulier important que les locataires puissent connaître et défendre leurs droits. À cet égard, il est utile de noter que le gouvernement du Québec, depuis longtemps, fait généralement mieux que celui des autres provinces dans la défense de ces droits importants. Par exemple, la Régie du logement, qui existe depuis maintenant presque 45 ans, protège les locataires du Québec contre les augmentations de loyers injustes et propose un bail standardisé avec des normes claires. Le Québec a aussi récemment agi contre les rénovictions et les logements de type Airbnb. Nous pouvons par ailleurs être fiers de noter que plusieurs mesures qui existent déjà au Québec se retrouvent aussi dans la Charte canadienne des droits des locataires. Nous avons publié récemment 2 plans de charte portant sur de nouvelles protections pour les locataires et les acheteurs de maisons. La Charte des locataires vise, entre autres choses, à aider à normaliser les contrats de location et assurer une plus grande transparence dans la tarification des loyers. La Charte des droits des acheteurs d'une propriété vise, quant à elle, à rendre plus simple le processus d'achat d'une maison, plus transparent et, on l'espère, moins stressant. Une fois pleinement mises en œuvre, ces 2 chartes aideront à protéger contre les rénovictions, rendront l'historique des prix de vente disponibles lors des recherches de titres, protégeront les acheteurs potentiels contre les enchères à l'aveugle et bien plus encore. Bien sûr, la mise en œuvre de tout ça nécessite de travailler respectueusement et efficacement avec les provinces et les territoires, et nous sommes et continuerons d'être heureux de le faire comme nous l'avons toujours fait en matière d'habitation. En terminant, depuis 2015, nous avons collaboré efficacement avec le gouvernement du Québec pour créer plus de logements abordables pour les Québécois et les Québécoises. Nous avons notamment signé l'an dernier une entente historique de 1,8 milliard de dollars qui permet de créer plus de 8 000 logements abordables et sociaux au Québec. C'est malheureusement une entente que Pierre Poilievre dit vouloir déchirer s'il prenait le pouvoir. C'est le même Pierre Poilievre qui, durant son mandat comme ministre du Logement, a créé un total de 6 logements abordables à travers tout le pays et qui préfère insulter les villes du Québec plutôt que de vouloir collaborer avec elles. Le plan de Pierre Poilievre propose non seulement de contourner le gouvernement du Québec pour financer directement les municipalités, mais il menace également de couper de manière totalement arbitraire le financement de plusieurs d'entre elles. C'est, en terminant, dans cet esprit que j'invite M. Legault à se ressaisir suite à sa sortie de la semaine dernière et à poursuivre le travail essentiel avec la ministre Duranceau et tous les collègues du gouvernement du Québec, le travail essentiel que nous devons faire absolument ensemble au cours des prochains mois pour accélérer la construction de logements, en créer davantage pour les Québécois et les Québécoises auxquels nous devons répondre aux besoins et aux attentes. Merci et une bonne journée à tout le monde.
Merci. Sur ce, nous passons à la période de questions. La conférence de presse a commencé en retard et les discours ont été un peu plus longs que prévu, donc je vous demanderai peut-être de vous en tenir à des questions, des réponses très courtes. Vous avez vu, il y a beaucoup de reporters dans la salle. Let's start with David Akin.
Thank you, David. Good morning, Ministers. Thanks for taking our questions. Speaking to Mr. Poilievre, we're going to hear some speeches, I assume, where he's going to be critical of the federal government's carbon pricing platform. So, Minister Freeland, I'd like to invite you, perhaps at this point, make the political pitch for the carbon price and rebate program. So the carbon price and rebate program is a political winner because ... Over to you.
Well, thanks for the question, David. And I think the really important thing, which people are starting to see now, as the checks are clearly labeled and as the size of the carbon rebate has become really significant, is the price on pollution is something that leaves 8 out of 10 families better off. This truly is an affordability measure. And anyone who is proposing to change that needs to be honest with Canadians and needs to say to Canadian families, you know, families in Ontario are getting more than $1,000 back this year. Anyone who proposes to take that away needs to say to Ontario families, okay, you're not going to be getting that check back. It is important to be honest and truthful about it. And then I want to say something about the price on pollution and the Canadian economy. Canada has now put in place a very comprehensive industrial plan, a plan which means that Canada can and is taking a leading role in this tremendously important industrial transformation of the 21st century. The base of that plan, the base of that pyramid, if you will, is the price on pollution. And on top of that, we have our investment tax credits, the majority of which are now passed into law. And then on top of that, we have the concessional finance offered by the Canada Growth Fund, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and a few other funds. And that is not a theory. These are measures which are in place, and these are measures which are underwriting very significant investment in the Canadian economy, in Canadian industry. These are why Canada had the highest level of foreign direct investment per capita in the G7 and in the G20 this year. And I emphasize that in answer to your question about the price on pollution, because the investments, you know, the bottom of that pyramid is that Canada has a price on pollution. And again, anyone who seeks to disrupt that system has to have an answer to all of those investors who are here already, to all of those investments that are coming in the future, and has to have an answer as to how we will have a system that they can continue. And then the final point is the EU is moving ahead very deliberately with a carbon border adjustment plan. Canada is a trading nation. The world is not going to hold up its plans for climate action and for the industrial transformation because of political developments here in Canada. But the world will say, we don't want Canada's stuff if it is not produced in the framework of a clear carbon plan. Over the weekend, I met with some people from Apple, and they told me that one of the reasons they're in Canada is because they are looking to aggressively make their supply chain green. They are looking to aggressively ensure that everything that Apple sells is made with clean inputs. And you know what that means? They want Canada's green aluminum. But we need to have our system that ensures we produce enough clean electricity, that ensures we are producing clean aluminum to be an industrial country in the 21st century.
Briefly, again, your question is so relevant. Two brief things. First, economists in their majority, vast majority, are pointing to the things that Chrystia has just summarized. Everyone understands the environmental, economic, and social value of a price on carbon. The second thing is that Pierre Poilievre is starting to become afraid that Canadians are also understanding that. That might be one of the reasons he wants an early election, because the polls and the feelings we get on the streets do suggest that Canadians are starting to understand that the price on carbon comes with a carbon rebate that puts more money in the pockets of 8 families out of 10, and Pierre Poilievre is afraid of that.
Thank you, and this is a follow-up for the economics professor in you, Minister Duclos, about today's measures. Today's measures have the effect of increasing perhaps the pool of potential buyers of houses. Given that the supply of housing is likely to remain static or is going to increase more slowly than the increase in the supply of potential purchasers, these moves today can be seen as inflationary. Can you speak to what your government has done to study the inflationary effects of today's announcements? Can you quantify them? Are you worried about the inflationary effects of essentially introducing measures that will increase demand absent increase of quick supply?
I am always happy to talk to Professor Duclos, and in fact, he and I talk very, very often about the entire suite of economic policies of our government, and so I'll be very happy to hear from him, but let me give you a couple of quick answers off the top. Number one, what makes it possible for us to put in place these mortgage measures is that we have an aggressive, ambitious plan to get 4 million new homes built. We have the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is already acting to cut red tape to make it possible to build more homes faster. We have the Housing Supportive Infrastructure Fund that Sean has just been talking about, having the same impact. So I take your point that it is very, the key challenge with housing in Canada is supply, supply, supply. We are acting on that. But the second thing I would say, David, about the measures that we announced last week that we've detailed today, these are very carefully targeted. They are targeted, first of all, on first-time home buyers, because we recognize it is absolutely essential that the dream of home ownership be a reality for young Canadians. That if young Canadians are taking that step, saving in a first home savings account, and 750,000 are doing that today, it has to be possible for them to actually buy a first place of their own. So we are quite intentionally giving them an advantage, giving them a leg up in the property market. Second thing, and this is a very important part of the measures, they are focused on new builds. There's actually a challenge right now in the new build market, particularly in the condo market in the GTA. These measures actually are going to be supportive of the supply side of new builds because they're going to create an extra incentive for people to choose to buy that new build, to encourage people to build more. And then finally, David, to your point about inflation, the timing of this measure is not accidental. We today, as I said off the top, are at a time in Canada where inflation in August was at the bullseye, 2%. Inflation has been in the Bank of Canada's target range for 8 months in a row, and the Bank of Canada has been quite clear that it now sees downside risks to the target as being significant. That is the final element that makes this the right measure for right now. And over to notre professeur Duclos.
Well, I may be a professor, but Chrystia is both a very good student and a very good professor too. What she has just explained is exactly what I was going to say. In this particular instance, it's not true for all possible instances, by supporting renters moving into home ownership, we're also increasing supply of new homes, especially obviously those that are moving into new homes for the first time in their life. So there are in some markets in Canada, not in Quebec City, 1.5 million homes in Quebec City are relatively rare to find, but in other markets there is a bottleneck. People not being able to move from rental into home ownership, and that creates more pressures, obviously, on them, but also on those that need the affordable rental homes that they live to live in, and not necessarily, and not having this because those other renters that would like to move into home ownership can't afford doing so, or will not have been able to afford doing so until today's and the recent measures that we announced.
Nojo Dalamalise, Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister Freeland. The U.S. is looking to ban Chinese-made software in vehicles. I'm wondering if Canada is considering following the U.S.'s lead on that.
Short answer is absolutely. Longer answer is our government has made very clear that we take really seriously intentional Chinese overcapacity, and we take very seriously the security threat from China. That's why we acted decisively in imposing tariffs on Chinese EVs, on Chinese steel, on Chinese aluminum. We are very mindful of the environmental standards, the labor standards, or I really ought to say the lack of environmental standards, lack of labor standards that underpin that production. And we do have real security concerns. That was something that we talked about in imposing the tariffs on EVs, and something that came out very, very clearly in the consultation. As you know, we have a further consultation which is ongoing, and we are looking at whether we need to impose further measures. And we're doing that, I would say, first and foremost, really in close consultation with Canadian industry, Canadian labor.
And on another subject, I'm wondering what your response is to the Bloc's demand on increasing old age security for all seniors. And as finance minister, do you think the federal government can afford that kind of thing right now?
Thanks for the question. I want to start by saying I am really proud to be a minister in a government that has done more for Canadian seniors than any other federal government in Canadian history. We have increased support for all seniors. We've increased support for low-income seniors. We have increased support for the most vulnerable, oldest seniors. And we are continuing to roll out further measures that help seniors, like dental care, which has made such a difference in the lives of seniors across Canada. I mean, I have had touching and heartbreaking conversations with Canadian seniors who said to me, thanks to dental care, I can afford to get dentures. That's a really big deal. It is changing the lives of Canadian seniors, and I am really, really glad we are doing all of those things. When it comes to and let me also say, our measures have had a measurable statistical impact when it comes to lifting Canadian seniors out of poverty. That is something all Canadians should be glad that we as a country have done and are doing. When it comes to further support for seniors, we are having good conversations about all possible economic measures with both the Bloc and the NDP, and those conversations are ongoing.
Christian Noël, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour. Le Bloc aimerait bien faire passer son projet de loi C-319 pour aider les personnes âgées et bonifier ainsi la sécurité de la vieillesse pour les personnes âgées de 65 à 74 ans. Ma question à vous est, est-ce que 3 milliards de dollars, c'est trop payé pour aider ces aînés?
Merci pour la question et je vais répondre et après ça peut-être notre lieutenant de Québec va aussi répondre. Christian, merci pour la question. Et je voudrais vraiment commencer en soulignant que notre gouvernement a fait plus pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes, les Québécois et Québécoises âgés qu'aucun autre gouvernement fédéral. Et je suis fière de ça. On a appuyé tous les aînés. On a appuyé les aînés les plus vulnérables. Avec les soins dentaires, on ajoute un autre appui aux les aînés et surtout les aînés les plus vulnérables. Et ce n'est pas juste les mots, c'est la réalité. Et si on regarde la statistique, on peut voir que grâce à l'appui, grâce au soutien mis en place par notre gouvernement, la condition économique de nos âgés s'est améliorée. Et c'est une bonne chose. Je pense que tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes peuvent et doivent être fiers d'être citoyens d'un pays qui prend soin de nos aînés. Concernant les mesures en avenir, on a des conversations fructueuses avec nos collègues du NPD et du Bloc. Jean-Yves?
Merci. J'ajouterai 4 choses rapidement. La première, c'est que en 2024, si on n'avait pas renversé l'âge d'admissibilité de 67 à 65 ans de M. Harper, quand il est allé à Davos, il y aurait présentement à peu près 40 000 aînés qui se retrouveraient, non pas dans la pauvreté, mais dans la misère. On ne parle pas là, de la pauvreté. Là. Ils auraient tout perdu, ils seraient en train de tout perdre entre 2023 et 2024, tout perdre leur supplément de revenu garanti et leur sécurité de la vieillesse. Ça, c'est 30 à 40 000 aînés, donc plusieurs du Québec, qui seraient dans la misère. Ça, on a annulé ça, et heureusement. La deuxième chose, c'est que le plan dentaire va super bien au Québec. La raison pour laquelle on n'en parle pas, et que vous en parlez peu, c'est que ça va très bien. Il y a 800 000 Québécois qui sont inscrits. C'est à peu près le tiers de tous les Canadiens qu'on retrouve au Québec. C'est extraordinaire. 85 des fournisseurs dentaires au Québec participent au programme, et je peux vous dire, ils sont enchantés de comment ça va. Mais il y a encore plusieurs dizaines de milliers, probablement à peu près 200 à 300 000 aînés au Québec qui ne sont pas encore inscrits parce que les députés n'ont pas encore fait leur job de parler du plan dentaire dans leur circonscription. Malheureusement, jusqu'à maintenant, on n'a pas pu compter sur les conservateurs et sur les bloquistes pour le faire parce qu'ils ne veulent pas en parler du plan dentaire. Mais c'est super important pour les aînés. La troisième chose, c'est pour les investissements qu'on a fait pour les 75 ans et plus.
Vraiment pas beaucoup de temps, puis ma question porte vraiment sur C-319. Donc, si vous me parlez de toutes les autres affaires, les autres journalistes après moi auront pas l'opportunité de poser la question.
La quatrième chose, c'est exactement ce que Chrystia a dit. Les conversations avec le NPD et le Bloc vont de l'avant, vont continuer à aller de l'avant parce qu'on est un gouvernement minoritaire. J'ai sauté la troisième partie.
Donc, je vais être obligé de vous relancer parce que la seule chose que je comprends de Mme Freeland, c'est que vous êtes en train de négocier avec le Bloc, probablement pour donner la recommandation royale nécessaire pour un projet de loi qui vient de l'opposition. Est-ce que...
Je n'ai pas dit ça.
J'ai
choisi mes mots avec beaucoup d'attention et Jean-Yves a fait la même chose.
Donc, la recommandation royale, est-ce que vous le considérez à ce moment-ci?
J'ai déjà répondu à la question et je pense que les autres journalistes ont des questions aussi. Comme vous avez dit.
Mais vous ne considérez pas la recommandation royale, donc?
J'ai déjà répondu à la question, Jean-Yves a fait la même chose.
OK, merci. We'll go to Brian Platt, Bloomberg.
Hi, Minister Freeland. On the issue of mortgage, the mortgage changes, I was looking back at the 2021 platform, and one of the promises in there was to reduce mortgage premiums by 25% on mortgage insurance. So what kind of conversations did you have? Obviously, that was not included in the announcement. What kind of conversations did you have about this, and why did the government decide not to proceed with that promise?
It's a really good question. Right now, we are focused on these measures, which are truly transformative for young Canadians and for first-time home buyers. These measures, taken together with the First Home Savings Account, are really going to, taken together with the First Home Savings Account and building 4 million homes, are really putting the dream of home ownership back in reach for young Canadians. They're going to mean that more young people can afford a down payment, and they're going to make the monthly down payment more affordable. I think you've seen, Brian, that we have been, very systematically building a housing plan step by step by step. Some measures have only been possible after other measures have been taken. For instance, supporting first-time home buyers and people buying new builds has only been possible once we had a plan to get more homes built faster. The macroeconomic environment has also been an important consideration, but please rest assured, last week's announcement and today's underpinning of last week's announcement are not the last you'll hear from us on housing.
I also, there was a few stories last week about some proposal out there about the pension, your government's wishes to see pension plans invest more in Canada. There was some stories about a Brookfield proposal that may or may not go forward or happen. Can you update us on your own thinking about this right now, about the government's wish to see pensions invest more? Is there a time frame for Mr. Duclos to file his recommendations to you, and will that report be public when it comes?
So questions to Canadian companies should be posed to Canadian companies. But I have made no secret of my view that it would be a very good thing to have Canada's world-class pension funds investing more money in Canada and Canadians. That would be really, really helpful for us all. I am really glad that you mentioned Steve Duclos. He is an exceptional Canadian, and he has been working really, really hard together with me, together with the pension funds, and together with dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of Canadians who have gotten in touch with him. I think there is a lot of excitement about this work. Steve and I are working very closely. We are in very close touch. We think this is a really important effort. I don't have anything to announce about it, apart from to say a lot of work was done by Steve, by the Department of Finance over the summer, and we're very excited about the opportunities.
I'm told that time is up for this press conference. The ministers have to go to their days. That's unfortunate. There's many more reporters in the room that were there to inform the people about the government policies, but perhaps next time.
Why were you so late?
There's a lot going on in the world, Tonda. I mean, there really is.
On that, I thank you. This is the end of the press conference.
What do you think about what Doug Ford said yesterday? About saying that people need to get up their ASS and work. Do you agree?
Thanks for your questions.